Hi, I'm Kevin Shin, TV Newspoint youth reporter. 63 years ago, June 25th, North Korea started a war against South Korea. South Korea at the time did not have enough men or firepower to fight back. Fortunately, UN and Americans helped them out for a long 3 years of fighting the country back. 36,000 American soldiers were killed. More than 100,000 American soldiers were wounded. It was the most costly war since World War II. 3 years later, in 1953, UN and North Korea signed an armistice for a ceasefire on the 38th parallel. Since then, South Korea is a free country, leading one of the most economic countries in the world. As I am a Korean American born here in the United States, my parents came from South Korea. Without the US troops' help, my parents might not be here. Today we visit the Dearborn City and meet the city mayor, Jack O'Reilly, whose father, Jack O'Reilly Sr., fought for the Korean War. He came back to the US and stayed in the city of Dearborn, where his son is the mayor of Dearborn currently. Jack O'Reilly Sr. has passed away, but his son carries his honor throughout today. Every year, Mayor Jack O'Reilly Jr. respects Korean War veterans and honors them. His 18 years as mayor of Dearborn, he continues to carry honor for Korean War veterans and the Armistice event. What is his message for the young generation of Korean people and the young generation of American students? Hi, Mayor O'Reilly. Thank you for interviewing with me.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I'd like to talk about your father. When did he fight for the Korean War, and what was his position?
He enlisted in 1950. He had actually served in World War II first, so he had spent, he enlisted in 42, went to World War II, served until the end of that conflict, came home, and then in 1950 he enlisted to fight in the Korean War. He was a sergeant. Actually, he was a drill sergeant preparing soldiers to go overseas initially out of California, and then he kind of decided he wanted to go over, and he went over with one of the groups that he was training. So that would have been at some point in 1950.
How many years have you and him honored Korean War veterans and the Armistice event?
Well, we started in 2000 in anticipation of the 50th anniversary of the commencement of the Korean War. The City of Dearborn took a number of steps, including applying for national status as a host community for that. And then we also we have an active Allied War Veterans Council. And the council is made up of all the different veterans groups in and around the Dearborn area. And they actually, with support from the city, they plan a lot of different veterans events. And John Rosalowski, a Korean War veteran, who's active in our community, had the notion he wanted to do something really special. So we started off then, but it emerged. We actually then decided to create a permanent memorial on the grounds of the Ford Community Performing Arts Center. So again, working with different groups, but particularly the Allied War Veterans Council, we put in both a living memorial, which are 3 crabapple trees, red crabapples, that are planted as a living memorial, one for each year of the conflict, and then a very nice excavated stone with a plaque on it that commemorates the Korean War. And so those 2 elements are permanently placed on our city property.
What are your thoughts on the Korean War as a Korean War veteran family?
Well, you know, it's really interesting talking to my father because his experiences really did enlighten a lot of the background that you might not normally have. And he had a contrast because he was able to really talk about the difference between the way that the Second World War, at least America's part of the Second World War, was conducted versus the way that the Korean War effort or Korean conflict was carried out. And one of the differences he felt is that in World War II, there was a clear objective. Every soldier had a pretty good idea of what the goals were, what the objectives were, and there seemed to be a better focus and so on. He said in Korea, the problem is that there was as much a political dimension to it as there was the actual conduct of the conflict itself. And he felt that that really created some uncertainty And he often talked about that in context of the later Vietnam War that the United States, of course, was engaged in saying that he sort of saw that transition of going from a war where there was clarity of purpose to a war perhaps where you knew what the long-term objective was, but you really didn't have an idea of what your role would be, let's say on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis. So I think he really was able to characterize, and he did end up with a battlefield promotion because while he was there, his lieutenant was killed and he was sent back for training and then came back and was promoted to lieutenant. But he really had a lot of insights into just the conduct of the war and often commented on that.
Would you tell us about the Korean War, about what we have to learn?
Well, actually, I jumped the gun, I guess, because I talked a little bit about that. But I think it's really, that whole element as we look at the progress of war nationally. One is that war should only occur when unavoidable. And I think that unfortunately, at the times that each of those wars initiated, it was unavoidable. I mean, I don't think there was another course. But we have to learn that we need to really try and find better solutions and really focus on, the idea that it should be self-determination. And I think that's really what comes out of this, is if you look at it, is that all peoples on earth should have self-determination, but it needs to be unbridled self-determination. They should have the right to choose how to conduct their affairs, what their government should be in a free way and in a democratic way. And that's where the conflicts come in. And I think, as we look today at Korea, a few years ago, the Korean government sent a wonderful video over to Dearborn that reflected a sort of a presentation of a thank you from the people of South Korea to the people of America for the war and so on. And it was a very moving video and one that had a lot of, had the lessons we had to learn. As a free society, South Korea has flourished. They have been able to accomplish a great deal, extraordinarily, really. But it is that element that a war should only be conducted when the alternative, meaning that if you don't conduct the war, that people will be, I could use the word enslaved, but that may be too strong, but people will be deprived of their natural rights, deprived of their opportunities. And I think that's the balance we've learned, is that war should be the last resort and only used when the alternative is that people will in fact be, their rights or their opportunities will be taken away artificially. And I think that's the lesson that we learned from this.
A lot of people say it's a forgotten war. What do you think about that?
Oh, it was in the sense, and again the contrast, because the period of time between the end of World War II and the onset of the Korean War, Korean conflict it was called, it wasn't even designated initially, people didn't refrain from calling it a war, the distance between them was about 5 years. And so you had this contrast at the end of World War II, everybody came back, there was celebration, there was heroes, there was a sense that everybody felt part of it and supported everyone. The Korean War was different. There wasn't the same impetus, there wasn't the same, enlistments weren't as robust, people weren't certain about what the real commitments were to it, so that was a factor. And then the conduct of the war, as I said, and then the conclusion of the war didn't seem to be, people were confused about what had been accomplished or what didn't. In hindsight, looking back, we can see a great deal was accomplished, but at the time that the Korean War ended, it was not clear as to what had been accomplished, what was achieved. And then back home and here at the U.S., the soldiers were not greeted with the same enthusiasm. They didn't have the same opportunities. I remember, I won't mention the store, but there's a large department store in the U.S. that my family would never go to because my parents, when they came back from the Korean War, my father had gotten a job, but it had been a struggle, and so he wanted to go and get an appliance, and the person at the store was very rude about giving credit to Korean War veterans. We don't know if we won't do this. And I still remember, because it was like, no matter what, we were not going to go to that store ever. But it was reflective of that sense that instead of supporting and being helpful to people, in some cases Korean War veterans came back and felt like they were a pariah. They were something to be avoided, that people didn't support them. And I think that's where the idea of the forgotten war was, that it just didn't seem like people just seemed to want to set aside and act almost as if it never happened, and those people who were there were sort of invisible. And I don't want to be too hard, but that was the feeling that a lot of veterans had, and it was, what brought them together. My father was the commander of the local veterans post for many years. He actually served with the City of Dearborn as a veterans counselor, and so on. And of course, he served in the National Guard. When he came back from Korea, he joined the National Guard and served up through the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the National Guard. But there was I think the forgotten war aspect caused a lot of Korean War veterans to really unify here, come together, support each other. So there was a lot of positive that came out of that through the veterans organizations, through the people who committed to making sure that they at least supported each other.
As an American, do you know about the 36,000 soldiers who sacrificed themselves for South Korea? And what does it mean to you? What does it tell the young generation?
Well, as I said, it was the fact that these people went out and said that we have to look beyond just our immediate needs. We have to look at what are the global needs. What is it we have to do? And it's often, there's a lot of things related to the U.S. role sometimes in the world, but I know, and that's how my father felt, is there were initiatives taking place globally that countries were taking over other countries, controlling other countries, depriving people of freedom. And there had to be somebody to stand up. And so those 36,000 people who died there, and almost 3 times that much, just under 100,000 that were wounded, those people had agreed that we have a duty to everyone on earth. If we are free and independent people, we have a duty to ensure that everyone else has a chance to be free and independent. And there's a cost to that. It's not going to be easy. It's difficult. And sometimes, we're in conflict now in Afghanistan. We've been in Iraq. Those things are very challenging. But the alternative, we've also seen where one country can come and dominate many other countries and control their lives for a long period of time. And we've seen that, in the last several decades. And so I guess the thing is it worth that price? Is the value there for people to sacrifice their life? I say yes, because what happens in one part of the world, if it goes unchecked and it causes harm, it's going to visit everybody else at some point. It's like a storm that never stops.
How difficult do you think the 36,000 soldiers' families have been through the war today?
Well, at this point, those families have certainly accepted and, as I said, adjusted. What I know is it varied from community to community, but in Dearborn, one of the things I was always proud of is that the City of Dearborn actually had an office to serve veterans and their families. So of those people in Dearborn who had families that died or near Dearborn, they had a place to come and get help, get financing, get money for education, get assistance even doing their taxes, whatever. So the families, at least who were here, knew that they weren't forgotten, that they weren't left on their own devices, that the community supported them. And I'm certain that most of their families and children have gone on and been successful. So as I said, I think when we talk about the two levels, when we talk about the Forgotten War, we're talking about the broader general population that kind of didn't really, I think, honor the people who served as much as they could have. But when we talk about the community of veterans, veterans of any war, veterans of any branch of the military, they did support those families and those veterans. They did come to their aid. They did make sure that their children had scholarships, so on and so forth. So they while it wasn't as broad a group supporting them as I think they deserved, it was there. The support was there, and the community was there for them.
According to defense history, 2,700 soldiers' bodies have still yet to be found in the battlefield of the North Korean side. What can we do to bring them back and honor and respect them?
Well, it still surprises me how bodies or remains of soldiers are still coming back. It just happened in the last few weeks that there was another incident where some remains were shipped back and identified. So I think it's that idea that we don't give up. You'll see at our City Hall here and around the city we have the POW MIA flags. We remember them at every service. It's that point, going back to the families, is the families need to know that we, like they, want closure. We want to know, okay, we know what happened to them. We have some idea. There's a finality to it. Now, will it ever happen? Absolutely, we don't know. I mean, we know planes went down in places that are very remote and very unlikely. We know that persons may have drowned, and we're not going to find it. So, is it possible that all of those remains will be identified? I think not. But keeping alive their memory and keeping alive the fact that we haven't forgotten them gives hope and gives comfort to the families and their successors, and quite literally family members who never met them, who never had the opportunity to know them because they weren't even born at the time. So, like I said, that's an important element of just the commitment we have to make to anyone who is willing to put their life on the line to defend freedom.
What would you tell the young generation of why for 60 years we have honored the Armistice event?
Because we need to remember that, one, it is everybody's duty to ensure the rights and the freedoms of everybody else, no matter where they are, and that we need to remind ourselves that there is a way to resolve issues. And boy, more than ever, it's important to say the first attempt at resolution should be non-military. It should be an ability to try and get the parties to come to a meeting of the minds, to find some balance where they can coexist, where they can operate. But that's not always possible. And so remembering these keeps us in tune. And I've done some reading, and it's interesting because as time goes on, we have the opportunity, if we want to learn, we have the opportunity to read materials that were not public about decisions being made at high levels, about the conversations that happened at high levels. And that informs us that the things we were most afraid of were real in the sense that they could have happened without intervention, okay? The idea that other countries would come and take control of, influence, and perhaps deprive other humans of their rights and their opportunities just because it was in their self-interest was very real. A lot of people, we talk about the domino theory, which was, of course, the domino theory really, I think, in a sense, began with Korea in the idea that if one community falls, then the next will fall, and the next will fall, and pretty soon, people will lose their freedoms. And certainly that was the impetus, that was the justification for later wars like Vietnam. And so now as we look at historical documents, we realize that that wasn't just a scare tactic, it wasn't just something someone invented. There were real reasons that we had a justified concern that that some groups of people or some political entities would take control for their own purposes and deprive people of their rights, opportunities, and even their lives. And I think that's the thing we have to keep in mind, or if we lose sight of that, then by the time we really wake up and react, it could be too late.
Thank you so much for answering our questions.
Great. Well, pleasure. Thank you very much.
Today we visited the city of Dearborn and met with Mayor Jack O'Reilly, a Korean War veteran family. He didn't fight for the war, but his father is a veteran of the war. He carries his father's honor through our Korean community and honors the Korean War veterans. We should learn from him and what human sacrifices mean from another country to another country. I learned from the media that despite challenging weather to fighting a country some never heard of before, they fight for the freedom of South Korea. I've never been to South Korea personally, but I learned from my father that we should honor whoever sacrificed for my family, South Korea, and for the freedom of the world. I appreciate Mayor Jack O'Reilly to keep on caring for his father's journey to honor Korean War veterans. As a young reporter, I want everybody to participate with whoever knows of the Korean War or whoever wants to honor Korean War veterans. Remember, 2,700 soldiers are still not found in the North Korean side. We should not forget them and use every little effort to bring them back and to honor them. Thank you. God bless all military families, and God bless America. Reporting from Dearborn City Hall, I am Kevin Shin, TV Newspoint Youth Reporter.
"60 years ago, you came to an unknown land to preserve freedom and peace. We still remember your gallantry and sacrifice. The unexpected war put everything into chaos, and we had to put our lives on the line to protect the future of our nation. Then, you gave a warm helping hand to us in times of hardship and despair. It's still vivid in my memory that you came to help us in the name of friendship. When our country's peace was at stake, you came running into danger that might separate you from your loved ones for good. In a country you never heard of, despite challenging weather and fear of war, you devoted yourself to defend our freedom and the Republic of Korea. Do you remember the time we spent together? Even though we didn't speak the same language, we were all of one mind. We fought days and nights in severe cold, enduring injuries. We shed tears for the death of our innocent fellow soldiers. Your valor and sacrifice served as a foundation for us to regain hope. In the poorest country that was expected to take more than 100 years to rise from the ashes of war, we exerted every effort to recover from the war. With the sweat we shed, we began to make a history of a miracle amid the ruins of war. 60 years after the war, today, Korea emerged as the 10th largest economic power in the world and became the chair of the G20, as well as a proud member of the United Nations. Now, Korea is leaping towards a better future. Korea became the first country that transformed itself from an aid recipient to a donor and is reaching out to those in need across the globe. We will always remember your noble sacrifice and warm heart that offered help in the name of friendship. My dearest friend, you will always be our hero.